Hello there, and welcome to a special test episode of the yet-to-be-named sports talk show featuring UNL College of Journalism freshman students Tim Seipel, DeHaan, Will Beiermann, Paul Heires, and myself, Marko Jerkovic. All right, first up on the agenda here, we're going to be talking about Drew Brees, who is out up to 6 weeks with a thumb injury. First up, talking with me is Tim and Will. Tim and Will, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, shout out to Joseph Rena, who is also on this show. Hope I didn't butcher that.
No, you got it. Thank you.
All right, shout out, man. You forgot to mention him. Well, what can we say? Huge blow for the Saints. First of all, Sean Payton actually made his first announcement today, and he's going to be splitting time between Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill, the god, the man himself.
I would actually say Teddy Bridgewater is probably the guy that you want to go with. Teddy Bridgewater has obviously shown a lot of potential throughout his preseason and the games that he started in the regular season as a former Minnesota Viking quarterback. So Taysom Hill I think is mainly not going to do much in the game, and I think he needs a balanced quarterback like Teddy Bridgewater to carry the load.
So you're thinking that this Taysom Hill thing might just be for those trick plays that we see with the Saints sometimes, but just in more frequency to take some of the load off of Teddy Bridgewater. So he's obviously not the caliber of quarterback of Drew Brees, so he needs a little bit more help. So that being said, and with the injury only being about 6 to 8 weeks, can the Saints in this situation that they're in right now, can they still win the NFC South in your opinion?
Well, the big thing with that, now obviously Taysom Hill thing, that shout out to him, more of a reference. He was one of the more fun little NFL memes we had last year. But Bridgewater and Hill is going to be an interesting mix because we did indeed see Hill actually pretty successfully play like a legitimate quarterback at times. Bridgewater, it's going to be interesting with Bridgewater because we haven't seen him excel since his gruesome Achilles injury a couple years ago. But we haven't seen signs that he's not that good. We haven't had proof he can't reach the levels that he reached beforehand. I mean, obviously, historically, the odds aren't in his favor, but if Bridgewater can kind of recapture some of his form from before his injury, he's obviously one of the higher ceiling backup quarterbacks in the NFL right now. But I think really it's going to come down to, can the Saints defense, which looked the best it has in years last year, can they kind of be consistent and keep playing well? And also, Alvin Kamara, he's been a little quiet. He's been a little iffy over the first 2 weeks. If Kamara plays like we know he can play, that's going to be a huge thing for the Saints. And I don't have their schedule in front of me for the next 6 weeks. But, I mean, the potential definitely is there for the Saints to make it there. But, boy, they're going to be treading water for a couple weeks now.
All right, Tim, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so obviously the defense is a very important factor in deciding whether or not this will actually be a successful season for the Saints. But I think personally, we're missing one person, Michael Thomas. I think Michael Thomas is the deep threat and the wide receiver threat that Teddy Bridgewater will need. And I think if they have a connection, if they compete, I don't see the Saints losing much ground having Teddy Bridgewater as quarterback over Drew Brees, obviously out for 6 weeks.
All right, that being said, though, obviously this injury, and obviously we saw Drew Brees run out of gas a little bit at the end of the year, just from exhaustion and just not being able to make the same plays that he made at the beginning of last season. So does this signal a falling off the cliff, if you will, for Drew Brees and a potential end of the Super Bowl contending era that the Saints have been in for the past about 3, 4, 5 seasons with Drew Brees?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's hard to – the way the Saints have been since 2009, they're one of those teams where, like, boy, they have some really, really great highs, but at the same time, how often are they a huge playoff contender? But they've had some weird lows too, so they're one of those teams it's kind of hard to put them historically into perspective. But if Drew Brees, if they can stay afloat, like let's say Teddy Bridgewater, Taysom Hill combined to go 4-2, win 4 games, that keeps them pretty reasonably in the playoff hunt there, especially with Panthers not looking especially good. Buccaneers are out there being the Buccaneers again. So the NFC South doesn't. Falcons also a little shaky. They beat the Eagles, but they did not. I can't remember who they played.
Vikings. Week 1.
Yeah, that was not a pretty one. Falcons are also weirdly perennially injury cursed. So if they can go like 3-3 even, but 4-2, better than that, it could honestly be better if Drew Brees can come back after a 6-week break and play as well as he did in week 1 in last season. you could look at him getting a little extra rest even. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case because this injury could linger. He could have a setback. He very well could have just started to drop off a bit. But at the same time, for a player of Drew Brees' caliber, it's sort of like Tom Brady in that I don't see an Eli Manning or even Peyton Manning, God bless him, shout out. I don't see a steep drop off for Drew Brees or Tom Brady, really.
The benefit of the doubt is what you're looking at here. Over their career, their ability to continually perform at a Hall of Fame level. Speaking of Hall of Fame quarterbacks, another guy who will be walking into Canton 5 years after he's retired, Big Ben, goes down with a season-ending elbow injury, as well as Pittsburgh trading for Minkah Fitzpatrick. A whole lot of things going down in Pittsburgh in the past week. So let's quick start with Big Ben's injury and his ability for a return. What are your guys' thoughts on what happened on Sunday?
Yeah, so I think Big Ben has been pretty consistently rough throughout the beginning of seasons. I mean, last year he didn't start out super great, and I think that he's been struggling a lot throughout. I mean, he's getting back into stride throughout the season, but he's not at the point where he should be at the beginning of the season, and that can be a real issue for them. And with this injury, it does you do have questions whether or not he can actually really come back from this and be successful starting at week 1 of next season, because we haven't seen it from him healthy. So how can we see it from him for coming back from an injury?
And I'd say, honestly, I'm not as concerned about Ben Roethlisberger as I am James Conner, because Roethlisberger, and obviously these two words don't really work together, but I'd describe him as consistently inconsistent over the past couple seasons. But James Conner really looked like something special. The other thing too is Mason Rudolph. I was pretty high on him when he came out of college. I thought he was a good pick in second round, I think. Yes, I'm pretty sure second round, second or third, somewhere in there. He was a good draft pick by the Steelers. I saw a lot of potential in him. The interesting is going to be, and he's got James Washington, his receiver in college, they set records together for quarterback wide receiver duo. But can they keep Juju Smith-Schuster, definitely their best offensive player? Can they keep him involved? Because his chemistry with Roethlisberger was pretty special. And when we saw Mason Rudolph out there, he and Juju just didn't seem to click yet the way that you hoped they would.
Right, of course, and that was part of the shock of being out there and just being thrown out in the middle of a game. Obviously, Rudolph will have a chance to develop, and it's almost a blessing in disguise for the Steelers right now, as they lost their two biggest offensive weapons of the past 10 years in Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell this offseason, and Big Ben was kind of lingering with these younger offensive weapons. So this kind of gives the Steelers a clean slate, really, to just kind of go at things and try and develop, and we can see Mike Tomlin really try and influence these young guys. But at the same time, it's not really a freebie this year, because they traded their first-round pick to the Dolphins for defensive back Minkah Fitzpatrick. So before we get into the Fitzpatrick side of the trade, how do you think them losing their first-round pick affects how competitive they're going to try and be this season, since it doesn't go to them?
Well, first I'd like to say that I think the thing to describe, you talked about Bell and Big Ben and Antonio Brown all being gone now, all of them in not so favorable ways, really. But today I saw a post on a Snapchat or something said the Pittsburgh Steelers are like the Oklahoma City Thunder of the NFL, because they had 3 ridiculously talented players, and you just have to wonder, how did they not manage to win with players of that caliber? But it's hard to say. The Steelers aren't one of the organizations that's ever in the business of trying to lose games. Like, they don't go for picks. I mean,
they can't now because it's going to Miami next year.
But that's not a Steelers cultural thing. Fitzpatrick, I think it just kind of says they're going to try to go a little vintage Steelers. They obviously believe in Devin Bush.
Right, they have a great defense.
They got Javon Hargreaves up front. Casey Hayward's really good. T.J. Watt really looking like he could be a perennial All-Pro player. The hope is bringing in Fitzpatrick. I think they're going to try to go retro Steelers, honestly. They're just that nasty, solid defense, get a good running back in there, try to play a little old school. The Browns look iffy. The Ravens look spectacular, but it's Dolphins and it's
the Cardinals.
Dolphins and Cardinals.
What are you really getting out of that? So
exactly. Steelers aren't out of it.
I kind of agree. The Steelers, while definitely no longer a Super Bowl contender, although they probably weren't that without Bell and Antonio Brown anyway, but it's the playoffs are likely out of the picture, but I still think this is a 6 to 8 win team, and they could be trouble for playoff contenders late in the season. They may not make the playoffs, but they may decide who does and doesn't. So let's look at the Minkah Fitzpatrick side of things. How does he enhance this Pittsburgh defense, and how does Minkah Fitzpatrick leaving Miami in the way he did, as have a handful of Dolphins players over the past few weeks? How does that kind of take a look at the culture that Miami's building right now under Brian Flores?
So I think the main idea right now for the Dolphins is that they're tanking for Tua. I mean, it sure does look like it. As of right now, they have been outscored. I think they've scored 3 points in 2 games, and I think it's up to 70?
They've been outscored, I believe,
102 to 10, I believe.
Because it was 49 to 10 against Baltimore and 43 to nothing. Yeah, it's 102 to 10.
Yeah, so I mean, I personally
ridiculous,
think the Dolphins' culture right now is really struggling. I know with a new coach, Brian Flores, I think he's been put in a really tough position because right now all he has is Josh Rosen and Ryan Fitzpatrick. And that's really hard, especially when you just traded away your left tackle, who is easily an all-pro talent. But I think for Minkah Fitzpatrick, this is a big win for the Steelers. The Steelers really need a new jolt, a new chemistry, new energy in the defense because they've been struggling as of lately. I think they've been getting away from their, as Will said, vintage self.
Right, but also more looking at the Dolphin side of things, Chris Greer, he trades for Josh Rosen, obviously has Fitzpatrick as the safety blanket. That's Ryan Fitzpatrick at the quarterback position, but gets Josh Rosen presumably to be the quarterback of the future. But now this tanking, as you say, possibly for Tua Tagovailoa, what is it that the Dolphins organization is aiming to do, if anything? Do they have a plan?
Well, here's I mean, the past couple of years we've seen just tanking kind of become prevalent in a lot of sports. Houston Astros did a bit of it, and look where they are now. The Cleveland Browns obviously think they have something with their little tanking process. Philadelphia 76ers, a lot of teams are doing it. The only interesting way is that the way the Dolphins are doing it makes no sense to me whatsoever, because the goal of a good tank is to get rid of players like Cameron Wake, for example, still crazy good. I think he's around 35 or something, still crazy productive edge rusher. The goal is to find players like him, talented older players with big contracts, get them out of there, and then keep younger guys in, but build consistently around them. Make sure they know we're going to suck, but we're trying to build something up. They haven't been doing that. They've traded Minkah Fitzpatrick. He's last year's first-round pick.
Right, he's the guy who you want to keep in that rebuilding situation to help build a culture, maintain some consistency, and keep young guys, even though you're losing, they're gaining experience. And then eventually when you're able to add additional pieces, more draft picks, free agency signings, a good quarterback, then those guys can help you elevate your team. But the Dolphins seem to have no idea what they're doing whatsoever. Let's move on to another Florida team that is.
Actually touch on that real quick. I mean, it's very. It looks a lot of like what the Raiders were doing and what the Cleveland Browns were doing, because they're garnering a bunch of first-round picks. I think they've gained 5 first-round picks in the next 2 years, and that's a lot. I think they're going to be building a young core. And I think it's going to be a solid core coming into maybe the next 5 years.
At what cost, though? You gave up an all-pro tackle in Laramie Tunsil, a rookie of the a great rookie, potential future all-pro player in Minkah Fitzpatrick. At what cost? So
let's just.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say is they're getting rid of players that in a traditional tank. You keep Minkah Fitzpatrick.
You would keep them,
they're trying to trade Kenyon Drake too. Those are guys you keep because they're the young guys that you build around. Also, just to touch on Josh Rosen quick, I wasn't a huge fan of him, evaluating him when he came out of college, but at the same time, he's the number 10 pick of the draft. If he comes in and wins games for your team, good, you found a quarterback. If he loses games, good, you tank. I see no purpose to play Ryan Fitzpatrick. What do you have to lose from not playing Josh Rosen?
Yeah, okay, so let's go from one Florida dumpster fire to another, from one player demanding a trade to another. Jalen Ramsey, once out of Jacksonville, he is very unhappy with how the Jaguars organization and their defense is being run, and overall he's just very unhappy with the situation. So your guys' thoughts on this whole problem. Actually, it's been announced that Doug Marrone announced that he will play on Sunday. So your thoughts on this whole situation?
First of all, to get on kind of a little Colin Cowherd soapbox here, I get that it's really great that players have so much power now, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. They can control their own destiny. They can make sure they're taking care of themselves, and they're not allowing the league to exploit them anymore. But at the same time, I kind of get tired of seeing, like, every time a team has a rough loss, just seeing some guy be like, okay, I won out. And they do it very publicly. I don't think that's the way to do it.
Well, this Jalen Ramsey
been a long
situation,
time
he
coming.
actually he brought this to the team privately, and the team chose to publicize it to help circulate trade possibilities.
I'm aware of that, but, like, just in general, in NBA, NFL, a lot of sports, it's a little frustrating just to see, like, the public trade demands or even, like, the private trade demands that magically kind of get out there eventually.
Right, so that people have been bringing that up. They've been calling it a kind of NBA-style move, using it with a negative connotation, the player mobility, the player freedom. Tim, what are your thoughts on, is this a good move? Is this a neutral move? Is the players having more rights when it comes to their contract and where they play? Is that a positive thing for the NFL to be moving in that direction?
I think on the outside it doesn't look too great, but I think it will be a win-win for the Jags personally because Jalen Ramsey has been a little bit of a rough character in the Jaguars organization. And so I personally believe that it'll be both good for Jalen Ramsey and the Jaguars to get him out of there. As of right now, I mean, you can't. For me, he was publicizing his disagreement with the organization even last year.
He rolled up to training camp in a Brinks truck, just being ready for that rookie extension or first full contract. So let's just take a look at maybe some places you think that he could end up or that he will end up. Obviously, let's keep in mind Jacksonville has demanded a first-round pick and more is the direct quote from the organization for the services of Jalen Ramsey. So where are some spots he could land?
First of all, just to touch on Ramsey, just to put Ramsey's value into perspective for listeners who aren't as aware, DeAndre Hopkins, easily one of the top 2-3 wide receivers in the league. He said, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here. I'll try to pull the quote, but he said, he is one of the only defensive backs who will say, I'm a number one defensive back, and then will like shadow you every step of the way in a game. So DeAndre Hopkins, one of the best receivers, thinks that Ramsey's the best cornerback. Now, if I had to look at where he's going to go, I mean, obviously, the evil empire, New England, is always going to be a major player in any situation like this. You can't rule them out.
They have a first-round pick.
I can't say the Jaguars are going to be especially interested in dealing with them, but you can never really rule the Patriots out in this situation. More realistically, though, I think Seattle's got to feel a little optimistic right now. Their defense has been better than expected. Russell Wilson's looking great. Chris Carson's giving the offense a nice boost. Seattle's, I've got to say, is probably feeling more hopeful than they have for quite some time. Ramsey could go there.
And keep this in mind. Seattle is in the NFC. Jacksonville is in the AFC. Yeah. They're not only not in the same division, not even in the same conference. They would face him once every 4 years. That is an especially important to a lot of general managers. Obviously, that's why we didn't see Antonio Brown go to the Patriots originally, right? So I think that is a safe call. One of the more borderline playoff NFC teams is a likely destination for him.
Yeah, I would say too. I've seen Detroit could have some interest there, which makes sense. Their defense is looking a lot better, but they need that. Their front seven wise, yes, I am a Detroit fan. Don't laugh at me, Marko. Front seven wise looking good. They think that they're close to the playoffs. I'd probably disagree, but they think getting a secondary piece in there could work well. Also, Philadelphia Eagles are another team like the Patriots where I feel like you can never really rule them. Like, they've traded for J.J. Jordan Howard recently. You can't really rule the Eagles out of making a big trade like this.
Right, and I would put personally good money that Jalen Ramsey will be traded outside the AFC because
for sure
the Jaguars aren't looking to give it to one of the main competitors in the AFC or somebody that they will have to compete against for a long time. Just to touch a little bit on Jalen Ramsey's value, obviously DeAndre Hopkins had a lot of good words for him, but I mean, look at his actions this past week. DeAndre Hopkins was held to 40 yards overall. Jalen Ramsey was on him the whole time, and he was able to hold arguably the best wide receiver in the league to 40 yards. That is incredible, and I think that just speaks of his value. And the teams that I see Jalen Ramsey going to personally right now, I can either see the Eagles or the 49ers. I have seen reports that the 49ers have been pursuing that, and the 49ers have been on the up-and-coming this past year, and they are looking really good. I think Jimmy G has a lot of issues, and I think there's a lot of stuff to deal with there. But on the defensive end, they're not looking bad, and he will be a huge boost for them if they do actually acquire him.
And from your end, Marco, I'd write that in Sharpie, actually. Jalen Ramsey will be traded to a fringe playoff NFC team.
Yeah, that's kind of the view. So let's move on to our second to last topic here today. Eli Manning has been benched by the New York Giants. Daniel Jones is now promoted to the starting quarterback role. So in your guys' opinion, is Daniel Jones ready for this, and how do you think he will do with expectations and his play overall?
So I don't think that I can personally say whether or not he's ready. He looked good in the preseason, but that was not against number one defenses. That wasn't against their number ones. That was against second strings. So I personally think this move is good. I think it was good that they started Eli Manning for the first couple games because that gives Daniel Jones a little bit of time to see what this competition actually looks like. But I definitely think it will be a struggle for Daniel Jones at first. But at the same time, it is a really good resource to have Saquon Barkley right on the side there to drop off a pass.
Yeah, you could not ask for anything better as a rookie quarterback outside of possibly Ezekiel Elliott as a safety valve from the running back position. Will, your thoughts on the Daniel Jones situation?
Well, first of all, I was a big proponent. I was a Daniel Jones fan going into the draft. I don't necessarily love where they picked him. I think that's a little high for me.
I don't think anyone does.
I think Daniel Jones, I think he's a legit first-round prospect. I think he has a lot of talent. My concern with Daniel Jones isn't how ready he is. It's how ready his offensive line and his wide receivers aren't. Because Eli Manning obviously has struggled, and a lot of that's just from the fact that Eli Manning is a player a lot of people dislike. I have tremendous respect for Eli Manning and everything he's done. I think he's really, really excellent here. But, I mean, he just can't throw like he used to. But at the same time, those wide receivers, they currently lead the NFL in drops. They struggle to get open. It's a pretty name brand. It's not a name brand group of guys. So Daniel Jones is in a position. He's not in a great position to succeed. And you're talking about the safety valve. Saquon Barkley's good, but if I had to pick anything for my rookie quarterback to have a safety valve there, Dallas Cowboys offensive line from Zeke and Dak Prescott's rookie year, because he does not have the infrastructure right now to succeed in a great situation.
Yeah, as we've seen with the Jets over the first two games, an all-pro running back is great to have as an unexperienced quarterback. However, Le'Veon Bell, Saquon Barkley, they cannot do everything. They cannot save you from that. So obviously that's an extra issue.
Yeah. So to touch on the offensive line, I think that was the big improvement that the Giants have had this past year. They were able to pick up a couple players, and currently Eli Manning has been sacked twice in 2 games. I think that offensive line has really been shorn up. And personally, I think Daniel Jones will be in a good position to succeed, but I do not believe that they are a playoff contender this year, and maybe not even next year. It'll take a little bit of time, but I do think that he is in a good spot in New York.
All right. So with that, I think we're probably going to move on to our final topic, and we'll have to say goodbye to Tim and Will for today's episode. So for our college football pick'em, we're going to introduce Jared DeHaan and Paul Heires. So we're just going to go through 5 of the most marquee matchups of the college football weekend, and we'll just see what these gentlemen think really quick. So the first matchup that we're going to go through is number 10 Utah at USC, Friday at 8 o'clock on FS1. Jared, what is your pick for that one?
My pick for Utah USC would definitely have to be Utah. I just don't think that USC can contend with Utah's offense.
All right, so we got one pick on Utah. Paul, who are you going with, the Utes or the Trojans?
I got Utah. The common opponent between these two teams, BYU. Obviously, Utah took care of them in the second half. and USC just didn't get the job done. Now they were on the road, but I think Utah's got the advantage on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with the Utes as well. So that's a clean sweep for Utah on our picks against USC there. All right, so our second matchup is going to be number 11 Michigan at number 13 Wisconsin. That's at 11 o'clock on Fox. Jared, who do you have in that one?
If you would have asked me last week, I would have 100% said Michigan. But after seeing how Michigan played against Army, I'm going to have to go with Wisconsin. I just did not feel comfortable with how Michigan played against Army.
Same. I'm going to go with the Badgers on this one. I really think that defense has just come out strong in the first 2 weeks. Very impressive. Hasn't given up a point yet in this season. I think they will prevail and get the win at home.
Really, as much as I would love to pick Wisconsin, I'm going to have to go with Michigan on this one. Army, you have to keep in mind, was a 10-win team last year, and Wisconsin really has not played any team of value thus far in the season. So just based on who they've played and how they've played, even though it doesn't look as great, I'm going to have to go with Michigan on that one. All right, our third matchup of the day, number 8 Auburn at number 17 Texas A&M, 2:30 on CBS. Jared, who do you have in that one?
That's a tough one because I really want to pick Texas A&M at home, but I think I'm going to Auburn. I think I'm going to have to go with Auburn. I think they have the better upside, and I think they'll get it done.
All right, Paul.
Yeah, very, very interesting matchup. Texas A&M, we know, is pretty good at home. They are a 3.5-point favorite. Kellen Mond's looked pretty good to this point. But I'm going to have to go with the Tigers. I think Nix is just fitting in with that offense, and I think Auburn gets the win on the road.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go with you guys on that one as well. So a clean sweep for Auburn amongst our 3 picks. All right, then next up we have Oklahoma State at number 12, Texas, 6:30 on ABC. Jared, who do you have in that one?
Well, my sister goes to Oklahoma State. I'd love to go with her because she loves the Cowboys, but I'm 100% going to have to go with Texas. I just don't think Oklahoma State can contend with Texas at all.
Paul?
Yeah, as much as I don't like the Longhorns, as a Nebraska fan, you kind of have to go with that. Texas only a 6-point favorite. I got to go with the Longhorns on this one. I think that defense is pretty good, and I think it'll be close at halftime. I think they'll pull away in the second half.
I completely agree with both of you guys. I would love to go for the upset, but it's just too clear that Texas has the superior athletic talent on this one. I agree that they'll pull away late. So another clean sweep. So now on to our final pick of the day, number 7, Notre Dame at number 3, Georgia, 7 o'clock on CBS. Jared, who do you have in that one?
I'll definitely have to go with the Bulldogs in this case. I think that crowd is going to be crazy. I don't think Notre Dame can handle it, and I think Bulldogs win big.
All right, Paul?
Yeah, Georgia, I think, looked very good in their first 3 games. Notre Dame, not necessarily struggled, but they haven't played the most quality opponents. Still kind of trying to bounce back from that defeat last year in the playoff. I think the Irish don't get the win here, and I'm going with Georgia.
All right, once again, agreeing with you guys. I'll go with number 3, Georgia, on that one to defeat Notre Dame. All right, so that's it for our pick 'em. We'll have to see how we did next week, and maybe even next week we'll throw in some NFL games there as well. All right, well, that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Alongside me was Tim Seipel, Jared DeHaan, Will Beiermann, Paul Heires, of course, Joseph Rena, and myself, Marko Jerkovic. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.